Hello, welcome to Beastly Theories. I'm your host, Eddie McGrath. Tonight we have a very special guest, one of the Finding Bigfoot team, researcher, speaker, foot fetishist, and all-round nice guy, Cliff Barackman. Cliff, hi, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Now, I'm really happy that you're here. We met at CryptoCon in Kentucky last year, and we were all speaking, and I had a store facing you in Bobo. And I remember at the time thinking, oh my God, I'm not going to sell a thing. Look at the competition. But it was a nice joint venue, and everybody really connected there. Now, I do have some questions for you tonight. For the people at home, they may be things that they would like to hear from you. So I'm going to try and keep it as light as possible. Now, we recognize you as one of the team of Finding Bigfoot. May it rest in peace. I really love that show. But just let us know how your obsession for Bigfoot first took hold, and how what were you doing before you got into TV?
Oh, well, my obsession with Bigfoot probably started back when I was a little boy in the 1970s. I remember thinking about Bigfoots to some degree, when I was probably, in kindergarten, so 4 or 5 years old. We would go camping every summer in Sequoia National Park. My father would take the whole family camping, and I remember looking for footprints and stuff because there were some bears around. And I would find bear footprints and things like that. And I remember thinking about the Bigfoot thing. I mean, I wasn't as into it as I am now or anything like that, but it was on my mind. It was somewhere back in my little, my little germinating brain. And I've always been interested in unusual, strange things, because I grew up on In Search Of and all those sort of documentaries in the 1970s. But really, I guess I've always been drawn to unusual things because I'm kind of a weird guy myself. I'm pretty eccentric with strange interests and a quirky sense of humor and weird tastes and that sort of thing. But I guess it was when I never really took it seriously as a avenue of inquiry until I was in college, when I stumbled across a book that was a collection of journal articles written on the Sasquatch by anthropologists and other folks and stuff. And I started realizing, oh my gosh, there's actually real work being done on this. And so this is one of those weird sort of things I was interested in, but I felt I could actually do something about it. Because I was already backpacking and camping. So I just kind of put this on the list of things to do while I was in the woods. Because at the end of the day, Bigfooting is pretty much camping with a purpose. So that I kind of still hold that that model today, I suppose. But I would at the time when I was a young man, I think I stumbled across that book in maybe 1992 or 3 or 4 or something like that, somewhere in there. And I started reading everything I could, just digesting the literature essentially, which is what I would recommend anybody to do. Get off of YouTube and stuff, but read some books. That's where the real information lies. And I started camping in places where Bigfoots had been seen before. That's still a good strategy, honestly.
With friends, alone?
Both. In my early days, I'd mostly do alone, mostly do with friends. But as years went on and whatever, I would start going alone because I had more time off. You see, I at the time I was working in fishing tackle stores, and I was a teacher's aide in Southern California because I grew up in Long Beach, California. And because of, during the summers, I would be fishing all the time and working in the stores and stuff. And during the winter and fall and spring, I would be in the classroom essentially. And eventually I decided, well, I got to do something for a living. So I might as well be a teacher because I was already pretty good at it. I already understood it because being a teacher's aide in public schools and stuff. And I'd had summers off to go Bigfooting and fishing and stuff. And that's kind of what I did. So I would have, 10 weeks off during the summer. And a lot of other people just didn't have that kind of time off from work. So I ended up going alone a lot. And then I was an elementary school teacher. I taught 4th, 5th, or 6th grade, which is basically 10 years old plus or minus 1, until the television show came and grabbed me, and then that's what I've been. So now I've been a full-time Bigfooter since 2010 or 11 or something.
So teaching 10-year-olds, I think the decision to become a Bigfoot researcher after that full-time, it's not really as brave as teaching 10-year-olds, right? It was an easy choice.
It's a different kind of bravery. Yeah, a different kind of monster you're dealing with.
Well, definitely. At least, you could do something about it. Possibly, if you were confronted by the other monster. Now what I was you talking about your weird obsessions, how you got into this, and it just seems like essentially you were always a Bigfooter, and you had careers that kind of passed the time until eventually it happened in a more commercial way for you. One of the running jokes I really liked on Finding Bigfoot was about your foot fetish. So
Yeah.
I know that's a big element of Bigfoot research. So what's it about the footprints and casts specifically that you find so compelling?
Well, it's hard empirical evidence. I think that's the most fantastic thing about it, is because skeptics, are always kind of frankly running their mouth off about stuff about how there's no evidence for Bigfoot, and they're just absolutely incorrect. They're showing off their own ignorance. Now, they
Yeah,
may not be stupid people, but if they're ignorant of the data, they're not aware of it, or they're ignorant, right?
Mhm.
There is that element there. In fact, I find that the most the loudest of skeptics generally are the least well informed on the subject. But you can look at these footprint casts and see things in them, and I can hand them to somebody else, and they can observe it and use their own expertise to analyze it as well. That's hard evidence. That's
Mhm.
evidence that is empirical. It's not subjective like a sighting report. Because sighting
Yeah,
reports are obviously the most plentiful bits of evidence, but they're not very good evidence because you're having to deal, there's a lot of filters between me, the
sure.
investigator, and the Bigfoot. The observer sees the thing. How good of an observer is that person? What lighting conditions, distance, all that stuff. And then we come into language difficulties. How good of a linguist, like how able is the witness to put his or her experience into words and convey them to me? And how good am I? You see what I mean? There's so many filters,
Definitely, I do see
but
that,
but
and I
not
think
with the cast. That's the important thing.
mhm.
With a footprint cast, you have you have a photograph of the thing in the ground, you have the cast in your hand, you can weigh that on its own merit. And that's why the footprint and handprint and butt print and all the other impressions are so important.
And what type of things, if you were, and I'm sure you've seen thousands of alleged Bigfoot-like prints from around the globe, probably being in your position. I was wondering, from the perspective here, have you ever seen anything that's large but with a more human-shaped foot rather than the square, broad-edged heel prints that we associate with American Sasquatch?
Sasquatch is just like human beings or any other large primate, basically, has a wide genetic variety. Uh, so we would expect some of their feet to be wider than others and more narrow than others. But generally speaking, they all have pretty wide feet, and they are kind of blocky in their morphology. I've seen where we run into problems, and I've had this discussion with Dr. Meldrum, are
Mm.
the footprints that range usually between 9 or 10 inches and maybe 12 or 13 inches. There seems to be a gap in the data in that particular range, and the suspected Sasquatch footprints that we have in that range do strongly resemble human prints. Now, are they human prints? Because that's how big a human print really should be, 9 to 13 inches, somewhere in there. Or are they Sasquatch prints, and maybe like a pubescent Sasquatch goes through a phase where their foot hasn't widened out yet? I don't really know. I've had that discussion with Jeff on a number of occasions, and we're kind of going, well, until more data comes in, we have to wait and see.
Sure, sure. I mean, he mentioned that once or twice about the Russian Almasty. They
Mm.
had a theory about that being some type of Neanderthal, and
Oh yeah.
perhaps that was the reasoning for the different morphology of the
But
foot.
I have an almost cast in my collection, from Jeff's collection, and he just gave it to me a few months ago, and it is wide. It is wider than what I would expect a human print to be for that size. And to me that makes sense though, because Neanderthals were more robust in their makeup, and I believe that there's probably some direct connection between the surface area of the bottom, like the plantar surface of the foot, and the weight of the animal. And I think that's why Sasquatch feet are so wide, and they're partially, they don't have an arch and all that sort of stuff. And I believe that I have to go back and check, but I believe Krantz wrote about that in his book.
I see. And in regards to the footprints, when you're looking for the valid, genuine footprints, when you've observed something out in the field, and you were involved in the London tracks, weren't you?
Yeah.
In cataloging those, what type of things are you looking for in those footprints? What would convince you I am looking at genuine um, Sasquatch footprints?
Variety. A variety has a lot to do with it. Like the London prints ended up being hoaxes. It took me a while to get to that conclusion, but I'm
Oh wow.
confident at this point that they're in fact hoaxes. I haven't published the paper on it and stuff like that yet. I'm way distracted from a hoax from 2012. But
Uh-huh.
the fact is that I got clued in that the London tracks were hoaxed because of the lack of horizontal toe splay. I
Mhm.
had a lot of differentiation in the depth of the toes, but not in the splay going out sideways on the horizontal plane. And so that started concerning me. And so I took some of the more suspect footprint casts from the 70 something that I collected from that one time. Um, and then I called a known hoaxer, a guy. See, let me back up a bit. The London tracks, I think, were February of 2012.
Mhm.
And then in October, another hoax got reported directly to me and also to the BFRO by some known skeptics that hang out on the Bigfoot forums.
Mhm.
Okay. I'm not in the business of like outing people and embarrassing and all that sort of stuff, And they had their reasons that made sense to
Okay.
them. I still think it's rude and borderline, you know,
It was a
psychopath.
social experiment as far as they were concerned.
Yeah, they wanted to show that they could fool
Oh,
Bigfooters,
yeah.
basically. So one guy went and stomped all over the place with these wooden stompers up in Elby, Washington, kind of just south of Mount Rainier, that area.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then another guy on the Bigfoot forums, he reported it. And he used a fake name and he lied and stuff like that. And, being the Bigfoot researcher I am, that's 2 or 3 hour drive. So I went up there 2 days in a row, spent a couple $100 in gas, plaster, and food, and all that sort of stuff. And I gathered a number of casts from that location, and they ended up being fake as well. But the thing is, um, when I was looking at the London casts and trying to figure out, hey, this looks fishy to me, I called the guy. I called the guy that hoaxed me, and I said, hey, you don't happen to know anybody with a fake pair of stompers, do you? That I could borrow?
Mm.
And he goes, "Oh my gosh, I would. I'll tell you what. I'll make some for you." It's like, "Oh,
Mm.
yeah." And actually, this guy actually and I, we have a good relationship. I don't see him or anything like that, but we have a pretty good relationship, and I think he begrudgingly respects me on some level, even though he thinks I'm foolish. And I've seen him say very rude things about me
Yeah.
online and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Whatever. We all have our social baggage we take with us, and he
We
has his own
certainly
share too,
do.
I imagine,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
But anyway, so he lent me a pair of fake stompers for quite a while, actually. And I would take them out to the woods and I would run around in various substrates and examine the footprints I left and cast them and all this sort of stuff. And all the concerns, all the strange footprints I had a hard time explaining from the London tracks, I found examples that matched them using the fake stompers. And so I started understanding how those interact with the ground better. Or not better, but in a different manner than a living malleable foot would.
Mm.
And so through those two hoaxes, I've become actually pretty good at nailing down hoaxed footprints. Like one of the big indicators is a flat foot the entire stretch for numerous prints in a row, but with a little bit of dirt kicked up behind the toes, basically at the heads of the
Mm.
metatarsals. The heads, which are the forward part of the metatarsals, right behind the toes where the phalanges attach. That's not where dirt should be kicked up. And in human prints, it's a little bit back from there, but in Sasquatch prints, it's at the base of the metatarsals, almost right underneath the ankle, about at the halfway mark, maybe a little bit further back than that. So that's one of the indicators that I look for, and because the dirt kick up there, the mid-tarsal ridge, as they call it, or a mid-tarsal pressure disc, which is a similar print feature, but caused by different plasticity to the substrate. Those are things that I look for in the photograph of the print in the ground. And you can also see them in the casts as well. Not always, but often. So that's
Mhm.
just one thing I look for.
That's amazing. I think clearly there as well. You were hoaxed and you embraced the hoax,
Yeah,
and you learned
absolutely.
how to hoax your own tracks, and therefore you won't be fooled again. And I think I mean I've been caught out a bunch of times. I was caught out recently with a big cat sighting in Scotland. Now there was actually a big cat sighting. The police issued a local warning, and then somebody that was a sheet metal worker went and carved, actually cut out a perfect silhouette of a black panther, stuck
Yeah.
it in the field and photographed it and sent it to me, and I posted it. and all the relevant details are there. I was a bit curious when I saw it, but I thought, well, it's one shot. Okay, let's just post it and see what happens. And of course, he came in the papers a few days later and said, well, this was me. This is all a big hoax. These guys don't know anything. And you learn, to be cautious, at least, from that. Now, the footprints, I think, are great. We do have a few things here, but we're really lacking in that regard. And one of the reasons I thought it could be, if the Almasty had that type of footprint, and we do find bear footprints that are quite large, that seem to be unshod from unshod feet in a way, but it's just too ambiguous really to classify as anything. And I thought the reason that people overlook these quite a lot is that those running shoes that mask the feet. Yeah, that's right. They're very popular here. So people go out running them all the time, and I was out there looking for Bigfoot prints, and I saw those bare footprints in the snow or in mud in the winter. I think nothing of it at all. I just walk straight past. I might think the person had big feet, but that was it.
Yeah.
I go straight on. And coming off of that, actually, I know you've traveled extensively with the Finding Bigfoot program, and also by yourself in search of these animals. You've obviously heard countless first-hand eyewitness accounts, and what I would be very interested in knowing is what some of the most common types of encounters and descriptions that most people give. What are some of the factors that are almost the same every time that you hear from witnesses?
Well, I think that physical description, first of all. They may vary in size. They may vary in body type, I guess. What is it? Mesomorphs, I think is what the term is called, the different body shapes.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Some are skinny. Some are rail thin. Some are very thick. Some are built like a linebacker, like an American football player. Some are built like an American basketball player, but always muscular and in good shape. The hair colors vary pretty widely, from like maybe coyote colored, like a tan or tawny sort of thing, to a black. But what's interesting is that inevitably when lit from behind, like if the sun's behind them or a car comes up the road behind them, no matter what color their hair appears to be, there's always a red sheen to it when lit from behind. And that's one of the things that we look for when you're doing microscopic analysis of hairs, a red sort of color behind it, no matter what color it appears to be when you hold it up. And which is interesting because, you think of the other red ape, it's the orangutan. You'd have to wonder, like, why in the world would an animal be red colored? Like, how does that serve them? Whether it's an orangutan or a Sasquatch, which is often described as kind of a reddish sort of ginger-like color, right? And this actually has to do with physics. The orangutan or Sasquatch or any other animal that is red colored, when they are under the forest canopy, the red wavelengths of light are the first to disappear and turn to black, which is why deep sea fish are usually reddish or orangish in color, because in the depths of the ocean, all the wavelengths of light are filtered out and they appear black. So if you want to appear black under the forest canopy, you want to be kind of a reddish color. And so it kind of makes sense that a Sasquatch or an orangutan or anything else would be that color there. So anyway, that's another commonality.
Awesome. That's really awesome. I've heard that a lot. Actually, they're described as auburn sometimes, or occasionally ginger even. But sure. That's very, very common. And what about the types of sightings, locations? Now, we did a little study here, and we found that let's just say 98% of all sightings were incidental sightings. These were not made by people looking for them. They were largely road sightings, road crossings, or they were people walking dogs, often women alone, occasionally children as well. Do you find that you have that commonality in the US as well? That people seem less threatening. The hunters are probably rarely approached, whereas
yes and no. Yeah, I mean, I think the vast majority of people stumble upon them. People aren't out looking for these things, and very few of us actually do that, and our success rate is very low. So it's usually people stumbling upon them, usually out hiking or camping or driving. Those are the three biggest occupations, things that people are doing while they see a Sasquatch. And I think the driving thing makes perfect sense because when you look at the North American forests, the thick forests, the most nutritious plants need sunlight, essentially. So you're talking about meadows, you're talking about power line cuts and railroad tracks and roadsides. That's where the herbivores like deer and whatnot are feeding, because they need those highly nutritious, sunlight-fueled plants. Whereas other animals like elk, for example, elk can actually feed quite well underneath the forest canopy on very low nutritious plants because of their digestive system. It's longer, it's thicker, they're really large animals. So they can actually digest these low nutritional value foods, whereas deer and other yummy things for Sasquatches can't. So they're going to be feeding in these places like the roadside. So it makes sense that if the prey are there, the predators would be there as well. Mm-hmm. But a lot of other people are just hiking or camping and they stumble upon one, essentially. They certainly don't have to be in the deep, dark woods. They are right on the edges of civilization. I spoke to somebody just yesterday who saw one in Indiana. And Indiana isn't generally thought of as a Bigfoot state, but southern Indiana is very heavily forested. And he was three blocks down from the main street in town. But on the outskirts, there were woods there. It was totally suitable habitat. But you don't have to go to the middle of nowhere to see a Bigfoot. You can just wait for them to come to you. It might be a long wait. It may never happen, but it could happen.
Sure. I've heard a lot of reports like this, actually, about them coming right to the edge of towns. And that, I think that seems very even harder for people who are not familiar with the subject to believe. But then other animals obviously come to the edge of our towns because there's food there. We throw food away. There's rubbish tips and all kinds of things to pick up, I would guess. I was speaking to Gary Opit just the other day in Australia, and he says to say hi, by the way.
I like Gary. He's a good. I really had a good time with him.
Oh, fantastic! I mean, he gave me so much information. It was amazing, and he was talking about a few sightings just on the edge of towns as well. Again, just maybe a block outside of the main town centre. We're not talking countryside here, but it backs onto countryside, like most places do, forests and woods, and the rest. Bears do that, right? Bears come into town, foxes, raccoons.
Sure, it's where the food is, right? Yeah, it's always where the food is, and if you have food out and bears are around, well, that's a good indicator that Sasquatches could be as well. But also the around here, raccoons and possums and skunks. All those animals are, going to be scavenging on what humans put out, whether it's dog food or the compost pile or something, and Sasquatches, I believe, eat those. They eat all those animals and the things that those animals are going after. One of the things I've heard again and again from long-term witnesses, I don't like the term habituators. I don't think you can truly habituate a Sasquatch, but I like long-term witness. I think that's a much more appropriate term. Again and again, I hear when the Bigfoots are around, all the raccoons, skunks, and possums disappear. Now, maybe they know better and they're hiding, or maybe they're plucked off and eaten. Yeah. I don't know. But so whenever you find food that for all of those smaller animals, you do find food for the larger ones too.
There was a sighting reported here. It was a sighting, I believe, from the 90s. It was recently called in of somebody who said they saw a wild man chasing a fox around a country park at night whilst walking their dog, so chasing it to catch it, obviously, as a meal. And we have millions of these foxes. So I guess that could be a good food source. Now, just coming on to your time in finding Bigfoot and all of the time you spent looking for Bigfoot in the forest, I first became familiar with you actually I live on the outskirts of London. I've been a regular London commuter for many years. I watched and listened to the show whilst making my crazy commute around the city every day for a long time, and I really enjoyed it. You were often in the forest at night. When I was traveling around at 6:30 in the morning, getting ready to go into my own crazy jungle. And what I always wanted to ask you guys was, and it's popped into my head a few times while I've been out in the woods recently, is that was there ever a situation where you felt out at night in the forest that you were very close to seeing a Bigfoot, that you felt something was definitely there and you were close to seeing one? And in that moment, did you have a change of heart or transit? Because, of course, that's the situation where you're face to face with an animal you don't know, and it has to react as an individual. So do you. Who knows what could happen? So have you had a situation like that? And if so, did you feel like perhaps you didn't want to be there at the time?
Not on the show. I mean, the show, we were very focused. That was the point. I mean, the only Sasquatch I ever saw was on the show. And we were very close on a number of other occasions where I really thought we were going to go home with footage that night. But looking back to the early days of my Bigfooting, and I'm thinking probably around 1999 or 2000 or something. I don't really know. I believe at this point, looking back, my ex-wife and I stumbled across a Sasquatch at Bluff Creek. It's actually a Notice Creek, which is real close to Louse Camp at Bluff Creek or whatever. But yeah, we ran across something large and heavy that sounded like it to me, like it was walking bipedally down in the river, and I couldn't see it. And then it got underneath us and snapped this huge tree. I mean, this 60 or 80-foot tree just went crack, and like the whole thing like scared the hell out of us, honestly.
Wow.
And then we tried to get up to the bridge and look down the creek. We couldn't see it. We went back to where we were originally, and we could hear it quickly moving back upstream from whence it came. And then we went down to the riverbed. And it took, honestly, 3 or 4 minutes to go those probably 40 yards down to the riverbed. It was very, very thick. And when we got down there, I turned to Monica, is my ex's name. I go, Monica, whatever it is, it's right there. We got to go check it out. And she goes, you're going alone. And so in that moment, way back then, I had a change of heart, which is unfortunate because I know I was really close. I think I was really close to one of those things at that time.
Yeah.
But since then, because of that incident, I've kind of vowed to myself to never do that again. I mean, you only live one. You only live once, right? Let's hope at least. So when you're on the other side of the pearly gates and you're having a beer with whoever your deity is, and they're saying so, and you're there and with everybody else, they go, how did you die? And everybody's going, oh, I died in this hospital with tubes up every orifice of mine, and then when it's my turn, I can say, yeah, I was wrapped around a tree by a Sasquatch.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's a much more respectable way to enter the beyond.
Well, some of the guests there staying at the pearly gates, oh, it's Cliff Barackman. I guess he saw his Sasquatch.
Look, how did he get in here?
He must have seen it. There was a situation not too long ago when I was in Scotland at Loch Ness. I've told this story a few times recently, but it's very recent. It was in the beginning of January. Now, I do not classify this as a sighting at all, but it reinforced the question to me. So I was there's a path. I think you've been up in the hills there near Loch Ness, anyway, haven't you?
I have.
And I was walking along the Altnacreesh path along the Great Glen Highway, up in those thick pine forests there. And I had been down at Fort Augustus investigating a Loch Ness sighting, a recent one. I just took a walk and said, oh, it's January, it's winter, there's nobody around. There were 2 big trees pushed across, fallen across significant stretches of the path. And there were high winds 2 days before. So that, to me, that's a no-brainer. High winds, fallen trees, fine, whatever. And I got to the top, I saw the loch, and I was coming back down. It's very, very steep. I was taking photos of these waterfalls, and then in the corner of my eye there was a flick, and I saw a figure go behind the tree, but it was the corner of the eye. I said to myself, Andy, look, you're a monster hunter up in the woods for 4 hours by yourself, and now you think you've seen something and you feel a bit freaked out. Any feeling you have from this point onwards, and I'm not here to single animal the whole time either, that was the other thing. Any feeling you have from this point onwards it's got to be all in your head. It can't be anything else, because that's not a sighting, and now you feel nervous. And I, for a second, knowing it was about an hour and a half back down from where I was, for a second I thought, do I want to be in this situation? Find myself up in the woods suddenly, and then I could hear this movement in the trees and branch snapping, the rest of it. But there are a lot of deer up there. And that to me is enough. I didn't see anything, not really. I felt a bit freaked out, but I had been by myself for a long time looking for monsters.
Yeah,
and that's a no-brainer to me. That's like that's a sighting made up in the imagination. And then perhaps I noticed the sound of the animals once I started making my way down, feeling slightly panicked. So that's what was interesting to me. Okay, you're here. Maybe this is your chance. Do you want it? Because once you get it, you've got an hour and a half down to the woods. Maybe this thing will follow you all the way out. It could be quite a harrowing experience.
There have been a few times, like because again, I go Bigfooting alone a fair amount, and when I'm out there alone and I get them knocking back at me, and there's been a couple, and they're getting closer. There have been a few times I said, like, what the hell am I doing? But same advice I give to everybody else, don't go knocking on somebody's door if you don't want them to answer.
Exactly. Well, exactly. That's right. If you're going to go door to door, be prepared. There's some strange people that can
Yeah,
answer.
exactly.
You mentioned Dr. Jeff Meldrum, and there's a few others, but there's very few scientists involved in this research. Do you feel there'll ever be a soaring out in the scientific community towards the subject, or do you think the genre itself acts as a kind of repellent to career scientists?
Oh, well, I mean, eventually all sorts of people will be interested because the species will be proven real. I think that's inevitable, essentially. But I think that as far as academic interest in Bigfoots, that will be a slow and gradual rising of a tide, I suppose. Most likely, what will happen is that DNA evidence will be obtained and repeatable DNA evidence will be obtained. Now, unfortunately, a large section of the public who doesn't understand DNA will say, I told you so, blah, 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 and I was right, whatever. But most people go, well, I don't understand DNA, so who knows what the hell they're talking about, right? But a small segment of scientists who do understand DNA will look closely at this, probably as a lark, just like, well, this is probably nonsense, and then walk away going, oh my God, what is this? And then that will sort of start building momentum, and more academics will be talking about their specialty in the area of DNA or whatever, and convincing other people that, like, you know what, there might be something to this. And that's what I kind of picture this as, like the rising tide of acceptance that'll eventually culminate in a dead one, unfortunately. I don't really advocate for that, but it's the truth. I'm not naive.
No.
DNA won't be enough. DNA will never be enough. It'll just increase the interest level until a type specimen is obtained.
Sure. I was talking to somebody the other day about the Kraken. So the Kraken is thought to be the giant squid. And so that was the Kraken. If you talked about seeing a Kraken in years past, you were some crazy sailor spinning yarns. And now you walk into a museum and there it is in a giant glass case of formaldehyde, the Kraken, or the giant squid as we call it now. And I often think about that with Sasquatch. Will it be that one day you walk into a museum and there is a specimen, and you go, oh, Sasquatch.
Yeah,
And
maybe
go on to the next exhibit. Could that be a possibility for us in the future? Or what do you think of the difficulties of proving this species is real in regards to what you've learned about the behavior?
Oh, well, number one, there's so few of them. There really aren't very many of these things at all. There aren't 5,000 in Washington or Oregon or something like that. There's probably a few hundred, in either of these places, the best habitat, around. So the rarity of the species, the fact that they are elusive and nocturnal and hyper vigilant, and they don't want anything to do with us generally, and also it's going to take a bullet, right? There's not a whole lot of hunters here in North America are equipped to bring down something like a Sasquatch. Deer require a different size of gun. People who go out hunting grizzlies or moose or elk, maybe elk, they would have to get a good shot, I think. But yeah, those are the types of gun owners around in North America that might have a chance at taking one down. But what stops them is that despite the media, despite what the stereotypical hunter is portrayed as in the news or on television or in movies, they are not gun-happy hillbillies going around shooting at everything that moves. The number one rule of hunting is that you never shoot at something unless you know exactly what it is you're shooting at, because you don't want to kill a person. Well, as it turns out, Sasquatches are people-shaped. They look like a guy in a monkey suit. That's what they look like, literally. And I've spoken to quite a few hunters that actually had these things in their rifle sights. That said, I just couldn't shoot it. It looked like it was a human. It looked like it was just too human. I knew it wasn't a person, but it looked too human. I wasn't going to shoot it, which brings up another difficulty with the eventuality of bringing one in, is that these things are almost certainly a hominin. A hominin is a special term that means anything on the human family tree since we split off from chimpanzees 6 or 8 million years ago. And that means Homo erectus, and that means Homo like Neanderthalis, the Denisovans, all of those, Homo ergaster, and Australopithecines. And I'm a strong proponent of Sasquatches being relict robust Australopithecines, specifically Paranthropus. And that means they are a hominin on the human family tree. Does that make them human? Is going to be a very interesting question. It's going to revolutionize. There's going to be a revolution in thought. It's going to shift everybody's paradigm of what it means to be human when we see these things. Because I am of the opinion that these things use language. They have symbolic thought. Maybe not a language as advanced as ours or something like that, but some sort of proto language. They're talking to each other. They're doing something.
I mean, there've been recorded examples of some unexplained speech.
Oh yeah, and I've spoken to witnesses who said that they were going back and forth and two different voices. I think the evidence suggests that they do that somehow. So it's going to be a really interesting challenge after the whole thing's done to say, okay, well, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for Homo sapiens? And and Sasquatches, do they get human rights? Because there's already a couple forward-thinking countries that are trying to give cetaceans like the whales and the great apes human rights. Portugal, Spain, like they're both doing these things in their courts right now. I didn't have any idea
about that at all. That's amazing.
Yeah, and I think they're just forward thinking at this point because that problem will eventually come to North America. I think with the discovery of the Sasquatch.
Wow.
It's going to bring up all sorts of like indigenous rights and human rights and animal rights because Sasquatches aren't human beings, but they're not like the other apes either. They're something else. They're probably the only other hominin in North America, and that's a whole different can of worms.
I mean, it definitely seems like a really loaded subject. I've heard all kinds of conspiracies as to do with logging interests not wanting this species to be found because habitats would be protected and et cetera. But from what I saw on my trip to the US recently, and I had 9 internal flights while I was there, there's a lot of forest around.
Yeah.
I'm sure I mean, you have to protect that habitat, but I'm sure it wouldn't affect too many, logging interests in areas that are specifically used for that purpose already. Now, slightly coming away from Sasquatch, there's 2 exciting things coming up with you at the moment. First being that you and Boba are starting a podcast.
Yeah, we are actually. We did a little recording last night. We have a tentative scheduled witness tonight. We're just kind of starting to work on it, trying to acquire more content. I don't know when we're actually going to start publishing them, but we're just trying to fill the coffers with lots of good content at this point. So no matter what format the show ends up taking, we can just pipe the stuff that we have recorded into it. So
fantastic. And will it be just about Bigfoot, or all types and all manner of Bigfoot, cryptids, and even paranormal things?
Well, the name of it says it all. It's Bigfoot and Beyond. Obviously, Bobo and I are, Bigfooters essentially. So a lot of it will have to do with Bigfoots. But I'm interested in other things too. I don't have time to really look into them, but I've got some perhaps moderately intelligent things to say about them. I have run across witnesses of those giant river serpent sort of things, or I have gone to Loch Ness and poked around there, and I have personally seen a black panther, and I've seen a UFO. I mean, or whatever it was. I don't know what it was. So I've got a little bit of experience and a little bit to say about these things. But also, frankly, I mean, I think that at this point, the Finding Bigfoot audience, I get a lot of emails saying that they miss us, frankly. And this is just a chance to hang out with Bobo and Cliff for a little while because a lot of stuff never made it to the screen with Finding Bigfoot. And we're going to go back and revisit some of those witnesses. But we're also just going to talk about what's going on. Because not a day goes by, or almost not a day goes by, that I don't do something squatchy, like in November, I was out on a sighting report and got a footprint cast from that. I'm always playing around at the footprints. I have a collection in the garage. And, I called Bobo the other day and I go, dude, what's happening, man? He goes, yeah, I had to break into my neighbor's house. I go, like, why? He said, yeah, the parakeet. I go, the parakeet, what? Yeah, my neighbor, it's cold outside. Yes, and like, so the story goes like that it's cold, it's like 30 degrees. Bobo had to break into his neighbor's house through the window to go save the life of his parakeet and wrap it up and stuff. It's like, that's ridiculous.
Ah,
And I think that there's a certain slice of the Finding Bigfoot audience, or the Bigfooting audience, that would love to know about what the ridiculous things in
yeah.
Bobo's, daily routine that he doesn't think it. Today, we're supposed to have this interview tonight with this witness, 7:30, and I get an email saying that his friend has to bring a boat from Crescent City to Eureka, so he's going to jump on because the two deckhands won't go out in the water because the ocean's too rough. So Bobo has to go take the boat down with them. So Bobo's out on the Pacific Ocean right now trying to bring a boat to safe harbor. And that just came up last night at 10 o'clock at night. It's like, well, when
Yeah.
I talk to Bobo tonight, or if he's even around, if it doesn't kill him, I want to talk about, so what's up with the boat thing? Talk to me about that.
That's
Um,
excellent. That's
there's a
excellent.
lot of
He's living
interesting,
life the way we would love to live it if only we weren't so cautious.
I
Um,
suppose, although I've hung out with Bobo for long stretches of times, it could be a little stressful,
oh,
because there are sometimes like you
for
really don't
you,
know,
not for him.
yeah. No, well, yeah, he doesn't really. He kind of rolls with it, but I
Yeah,
think I'm a little, yeah. I don't know. Perhaps I'm a little bit more domesticated than Bobo is,
I'm very
but
domestic.
yeah, there are literally times you kind of wonder, yeah, I could die. I wonder how we're going to get out of this. But you always know you're not going to die. That's the thing about hanging out with the Bobs, is that
Yeah,
you're in danger. Things could go terribly wrong,
yeah.
but somehow, in some way, you're going to get out of it. You just don't know how.
I had this feeling when we spoke together, actually. The first thing that happened when I was at the conference, he came over and he said, "Hey, Beast of Britain." And I thought, "Oh, excellent. Bobo knows who I am." Then I looked down at my table with a big Beast of Britain sign on it and thought, it's just good conference etiquette. How nice of him. But still, he was very nice to chat to. He even said to me, "Look, if you're in my part of the world, pop by and we'll go and check out the whole, Bluff Creek thing." um, which would be fantastic, of course. That's everybody's dream. Now, this is an exciting thing, the podcast that you're doing, but even more exciting, I saw on your Instagram feed recently, say you're opening a Bigfoot museum.
Yeah, yeah.
When's
My
that
wife and
happening?
I, it's yeah, my wife and I are opening the North American Bigfoot Center, um, because there's other successful museums in the United States here. There's Lauren Coleman's International Museum of
Yes.
Cryptozoology. There's Dave and Melinda Becerra's the Expedition Bigfoot in Georgia. It's excellent, and each one has like their different take on the subject. They're different, a different feel, shall we say. And there's not really one out here in the west coast of North America. I just heard recently that Tom Steenberg and what's his name, Miller, his last name is Miller, Joe, or it's escaping me right now. It'll come to me the second I stop thinking of it. I think they opened a small one in Harrison Hot Springs. I haven't heard much about it though, so I need to get up there or talk to Thomas and see what's going on with it. But there's none in the United States. And Portland, Oregon, where I live, I live in the woods outside of Portland, but
Hmm.
Portland's 45 minutes from here. They pride themselves on being weird, as keep Portland weird, and it's like, why isn't there a Bigfoot museum here?
Yeah.
And once the show ended, I mean, that was my income. So I essentially my income dropped
Yeah. Well,
significantly, and
sure. Yeah.
yeah, and I don't need a lot of money to live. I'm pretty lucky in that way. I'm a simple guy. So as it seemed, you know what, maybe I can do this. So I went out and saw Dave Becerra's museum for myself. And I've seen Lauren's. I've been out there since, actually, and kind of I'm picking the things I like the best out of both of them, the things that I feel I can do the
Mm.
best. I'm kind of brushing off my elementary school teaching chops, and I'm going to put together an exhibit hall that addresses everybody from the most diehard skeptic to the most over-the-top wide-eyed believer, raving with their hands waving in the air. That's a little bit of something for everybody in a fun, quirky, but yet dignified and educational way. Because
I'm
I
sure it will be. Yeah.
I think so. I've got a great designer, my good friend Scott Minton. he's helping me design it. He designs retail spaces for a living. He did like the Glacier National Park gift store,
Oh
for
wow.
example. So
Okay.
he's done a few. Yeah, he's a heavy guy, and he's a great artist. So he and I are making the displays. My wife, who is a special effects makeup artist, she's
I
making
was
some of the
gonna
cool
ask you
stuff
about
for
that.
us.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I saw
yeah.
the
So
Gigantopithecus
oh yeah, the
mandibles.
yeah, I have not a fossil, but a replica of the fossil,
Mm,
and that was out one day, and I came home and she sculpted another, like
wow.
based off of that one. It's like, oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, so we're all three of us are the team, and we're piecing it together, and you know, we were kind of delayed because of permits and things like that, like county permits. We've been delayed for a long time actually, but literally last Friday we got a hold of the permits. So now we're allowed to barrel forth into the unknown and start construction and, plumbing and electrical issues and, all the boring stuff.
All the
But
joys of starting a business.
yeah. But after we throw money at this thing for a month or whatever, then we're
Yeah,
gonna get into the cool stuff, the stuff that I
yeah.
really want to do. Like the displays and how do we present this information to the public and what sort of partners can we reach out to and bring them in to help us out with our message, which is basically these things are real. There's a history of them and there's a history of people looking for them. We want to like kind of perhaps protect and preserve that tradition and put it out there for people to decide for themselves because they are real. I bet my life on it already.
Mm.
And all they need to do is become familiar with the evidence to open their minds just a little bit and say, you know what, maybe there is something to this after they walk away from our museum.
Well, I truly think it'll be a great project. And if I'm ever in the neighborhood, I definitely would like to drop by for a cup of coffee and a little look around. It sounds amazing. Now,
Yeah.
talking about projects and money and everything else like that, I've asked everybody who's been on the show if money was no object, you could conduct an expedition anywhere in the world. Where would you go? What would you look for? And who would you take with you? You don't have to take me. I'm not sensitive, by the way, because I'm asking you the question. I'm not going to be any help to you. But who would you take? Where would you go? What would you look for?
I think that the most productive method would be, if money was no object, is to find a residence with a long history of repeated activity and buy it and live there. It's as
Wow.
simple as that.
Okay.
Yeah, because you can say British Columbia. Yeah, there's certainly lots of Bigfoots in British Columbia or the Olympic Peninsula of Washington or Mount Hood National Forest, literally my backyard. But it's always just kind of throwing a dart at a dartboard with your eyes covered. But if you have a spot where there's a history of them and they've repeatedly come back again and again with some reliability, no matter who lived there, then those are the spots you'd want to be in. Sasquatches are creatures of habit, just like every other animal is. So those would be the best locations.
And who's going with you? Who are the two researchers that you're taking?
Oh, well, I'd be living there, so I'd want to take my wife, although she's not a
Okay.
researcher per se. But I do think that females play an important role in all of this
Yeah.
because I think it's probably their body language or maybe the sound of their voice or something
Mm.
that makes them a little bit more approachable for Sasquatches. But you know, I mean, I don't know if I'd bring anybody,
That's good.
honestly,
I think
because
your wife is a good choice. You may be listening to this, and I think you've made a safe choice, Cliff.
yeah, I don't need to bring anybody because the
No,
evidence that I gather, I can get into the right hands.
I understand. No, that I think that's a very different answer to the ones I've had most. You were included in Jeff Meldrum's team searching for
Hmm.
the orang pendek. You and
Oh,
Adam, which was
nice. Yeah.
very nice. So
Well,
he
Jeff and
does.
I consider Jeff a friend now. I mean, I'm lucky at that point. I'm at the point in this career thing that I'm, whatever this is, lifestyle career. I don't know what to call it. That I went from admiring these people from afar, reading their books, to actually being able to call them friends. Jeff has spent the night at the house, like
Mm.
in the guest room, and we've done I think 10 days in a row in the woods together, that sort of stuff. Like he's a friend of mine now, and I do very much appreciate his friendship and guidance and advice, um, and certainly everything that comes my way of value, I send to him. So,
I had a lovely meeting with him when I was at the International Cryptozoology Conference, and I didn't know him. I'd never met him before. I met him in the lift before we were all going to the conference. And the first thing that binged up in my head was, don't ask him about Todd Standing. He doesn't want to talk about it. You've just met him. Do not mention this. And later at the dinner, somebody brought it up. He's completely fine with it. We talked for a long time and eventually got into family and kids. I've got 2 young children. I'm in my 40s, but I've got 2 children, 5 and 2 years old, 2 daughters. And he has 9 children.
Yeah.
And he told me this, and I suddenly started laughing. I said, okay, so once again, the bravery isn't really being a professor researching Bigfoot. You already did something pretty brave, and this seems easy to you now.
Yeah.
You know, this is where you are. Now, I do really, really appreciate you coming on and do this whole thing. Just 2 quick questions before we go.
Sure.
Of all the cryptid animals in the world, which do you think will be most likely to be discovered in the next 10 years? What's the most likely thing with all the research that's going on out there to be discovered? Is it the Sasquatch, orang pendek, or something else?
I don't know. I think that we're most likely to find ghost hominin species first. And I don't mean like ghosts, like ghost hunters, ghost stuff.
Yeah.
I mean like remnant DNA of these creatures around. And I think that some of those discoveries might point to a living example thereof.
eDNA and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. eDNA, because that's that study they did of the cave dirt where they discovered Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA in the cave dirt. Even though there was no record of them, there's no artifacts or fossils in the cave. They found evidence of them in the cave. So I think that I think that has a real strong possibility of like some sort of a archaic hominin species in our DNA, or some DNA out there in the world in a cave somewhere or something that comes up. So an unknown species of something like that is probably extinct. I think that would probably be by far the most likely. I would normally say the orang pendek or something, but then again, in Indonesia, you're not allowed to have a gun. And as I mentioned, the only way these mysteries are going to be solved is a dead one. It's just the way, it's the state of our Victoria era science at this point. What is that thing over there?
It's a scientific assertion that you're making.
Really.
It is. It's not really a moral assertion that you need. It's same when we mentioned the Kraken earlier. Yeah. There were stories, but we have specimens now, and so we know.
You have to have a specimen. You just have to.
No, absolutely.
So because of that, I don't think that a lot of other countries don't really have people running around with guns like we do in the U.S. We're kind of a gun-happy nation in some ways. And don't get me wrong, I own a firearm as well. I mean, but I'm also pretty, liberal my gun rights. I'm not conservative in nature. But I think that as far as the number of guns in the woods, it might be something here in the United States. Because I'm not aware of I don't know what the gun laws are in Australia, so I wouldn't expect them to have a lot of guns around. So very strict. Yeah. See, so no one's going to shoot a yowie or a brown jack in Australia because of the lack of guns. And I think the same is true for most parts of the world, like Indonesia, where Sumatra is, where the orang pendek and the orang gadang are.
It's definitely true here.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, sure. So I guess, as far as somebody putting a bullet into something, I guess it would have to be the United States, just because of the nature of the country. But I think that if an effort was put forth in a number of places, there would be results. And again, I don't really advocate for that. I'm a compassionate guy. I'm not a hunter, but I'm also a realist, and I understand what's going on.
I understand it's a loaded subject as well, Cliff, in the community. You're not advocating it. You're just scientifically asserting that is the way we will know that this species exists.
Yeah, I don't want to shoot one. I mean, I feel so guilty. And besides that, what always comes to mind is the Grover Krantz quote, because Grover obviously was a pro-kill individual for Sasquatch, just to prove the species. And somebody asked him, "Hey, what would be the first thing you would do if you shot one?" And he thought for a moment and said, "Reload."
Yeah. I know that. I know that the line actually. And I think mine would be run. Obviously, reload it and run.
Yeah. Mine would be regret.
Regret
what I had just done.
Reload, run, die.
Yeah.
Well, look, Cliff. Thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciated it. I feel like I've learned a lot. And I'd love to have you on in the future and just keep us posted about the museum and the podcast and everything.
Yeah. I'm happy to come on whenever you want. It's nice and easy to talk and squatch. It's no big deal. Yeah, and as far as museum and podcast and whatever else I'm up to, just go to the website, North American Bigfoot Center, or my site, Cliff Barackman, and you'll see me there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cliff. Bye-bye.
Anytime, Andrew.